Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session and to the book club. As you would know, this book club basically operates on the basis that we read for you as executives, for those who are new to our book club. And I really want to welcome you to this afternoon session because we have a very exciting book and author to introduce to you. So I'm welcoming you on behalf of Stellenbosch Business Institute that is bringing this session to you. Stellenbosch Business Institute is part of the NetEd group, and so is also Edubos, and since 1st of August, also Da Vinci Business School. The book that we have with us today, the title is Who Do We Become? It is written by John Sinai. It is published by Jonathan Bell Publishers in 2022. The book is divided into three parts. There's an introduction, but then there is part one that deals with anguish, and part two deals with the abnormal, and then part three is dealing with adventure. So, and then there are a few questions at the end that you may want to deal with in the book, but that's more or less the structure. So you would know from previous experiences here that we read for you, we discuss the book, we share the content with you, but from time to time we have the privilege of having the author with us, which today is the case. So John Sinai is with us in the studio today, and he is a best-selling author. He's a member of Singularity University and also a global speaker. So we are really looking forward to share the content in a question and answer kind of way with you, and hope you will get great benefit from this.
Welcome to us, to SBI, and thank you for availing yourself to discuss this book.
My absolute pleasure. Always wonderful to be talking about the work that I spent so much time researching and writing about. So thank you so much for hosting me. Great to be here.
So the obvious point of departure is, and that's for every author, why did you write this book?
You know, I travel a lot. I see people around the world in different organizations and governments. And I find one golden thread is people are complaining about the fast-paced future. People are anxious about the uncertainty of where we're going. And people are frustrated at the pace at which this is happening. And I think it's important for us to realize that very few people in the world are actually doing the work, the real work that it requires from us to meet this future with optimism. You know, as human beings, we love certainty. And when we don't have certainty, our first response is one of danger or anxiousness or frustration or anger, whatever the case may be. But really what I'm trying to get people to understand with this book is, who are you choosing to become? The future is going to be radically different from the past. We all know this, but very few people are doing the work. Most people are doing what they've always done and making a pastime of complaining about the fast-paced change. And so the book is broken down into this process of transformation where we need to take the journey, and if you want to call it the hero's journey or the journey of transformation, into evolving ourselves to meet this future with just more joy and more excitement, so we can actually take advantage of the future rather than sit back and worry about it not looking like the past.
So when I read the title, I thought, well, is this kind of a contemplative question? Must I go and sit somewhere contemplating my navel and ask myself, who do I become? Or is it an existential, almost an existential outcry? Who do you become, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a bit of both, Frick, to be honest. I think it takes a lot of self-reflection. I think that it takes a lot of questioning about who you were and are you willing to leave that identity behind to evolve yourself to what the world needs. And also for us to be gaining traction by challenging ourselves, our organizations, our communities, and even our countries to evolve, to take a next step. And, you know, I spend 6 months of the year in Dubai, and I spend 6 months of the year in Cape Town. And the energy in the countries are so vastly different. One country is all about the question of who do we become, where do we go, how do we fuel the future in more exciting ways. And when I come back to South Africa, we are still dealing with trauma, and we are blaming everybody for this trauma, except actually healing the trauma within ourselves. And so there's such a distinct energy between these two spaces that I think it's important for us to realize that we have the responsibility to evolve ourselves, and in that process, evolve the communities around us, evolve the country around us. And so I think it's important for us as South Africans to stop thinking about the past, blaming the people, the governments, the situation, the structure, all of those things.
Yeah.
It's just too easy
Yeah.
to stay angry. It's too easy to not take any responsibility. And I think it's important that we do as citizens of this incredible country.
I think what you've just said shines some light on the first part of the book, which you call anguish. Because when I read through that, I was wondering, where is this going? Because I almost had a feeling that you described yourself being forced like a caterpillar into a chrysalis, and you are being deconstructed and asking yourself, who do you become?
Yeah. You know, that's exactly it. I mean, I think you summarized it beautifully. I think that we must realize that every journey that we take, every transformational process that we go on, every Hollywood movie we watch, the hero begins on a journey of self-discovery. And COVID-19 forced all of us to ask bigger questions about who we are, reprioritize what's important for us. And it's really quite sad. There's an anguish in letting go of the familiar, letting go of your identity, letting go of your comfort zone, and especially with COVID-19 forcing us to do it. You know, we didn't all jump up and go, okay, I need a big change. I'm going to go and try something new. We were almost running on the treadmill so fast with so much anxiousness and so much pace that none of us could even think of jumping off the treadmill. It was impossible. And here came COVID-19 and forced us away from who we were to start to design and understand that where we're going looks very different to where we are. And really, for me, it was an incredibly lonely time because I was traveling the world, living my dream, and worked so hard to get to a place where I was being booked literally around the world and doing world tours for my speaking. And the next thing, I was on a farm in Limpopo with my mother and father. And in one of the sections of the book, I talk about how I used to mock men in their 40s who still lived at home. And here I was in my 40s, changing the bed sheets of my bed with my mom and actually laughing and crying about it, thinking, what happened? You know what I mean? And so really, it's about my journey in this discovery of who I become and the reprioritization of what I think is important.
Yeah. And is that why you used words like grief and grieving in that anguish part? Because it seems to have been a necessary part of the process.
Well, it's exactly the right question, Frick, to be honest. And we've got to realize that as human beings, we do everything we can to avoid sadness, to avoid sorrow. We drink, we eat, we exercise, we have sex, we travel, we do whatever we can to avoid sadness. Now, the problem is when we avoid sadness, it shows up as anger. And so we see that many countries in the world, many cultures are very, very angry. And two that I have been exposed to, Russian men and Arab men are very, very angry. And it's almost like a cultural nuance to be angry. And really, if you think about what is at the bottom of that, is that those two cultures, especially the masculine of those cultures, are not allowed to be sorrowful. They're not allowed to be mourning. They not even know how to. And so it shows up as anger. And so this level of intelligence that's required to sit with sorrow, to actually mourn courageously, sob when you need to sob, because when you do, you're relieved of all the hooks of the past. And now you naturally become more optimistic about the future, not so fearful, not so angry. So it's that level of emotional intelligence that's required to sit with the sadness, sit with the sorrow, to let it evolve. So we can gain something called post-traumatic growth. And if we don't sit with that sorrow, we never gain that post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, I like the words you use, mourn courageously, because I think in the section on anguish, you say you have to now also, you have to experience this, but you have to take steps. You have to demonstrate the courage to change. You have to claim that responsibility to change, and not just lie back and let this overwhelm you.
Well, the responsibility is sitting with the sadness. That is the responsibility, because that action in itself heals so much, you know. And I use an example of my best friend's dad, Frank, who passed away. And I was asked to give a talk at the funeral, and I thanked Frank. Geez, I feel emotional now thinking about it. But I thanked Frank because while he was alive, he was such a leader to all of us. He was like a father to many, many boys, you know, like all us young guys looked up to Frank. He was a mountain of a man, always recited poetry when we used to go walking with him. He just guided us. And then when he passed, he gave me the opportunity to mourn many other losses, because I sobbed and I cried deeply for the loss of that man in my life. But actually what Frank did was give me an opportunity to heal other things that I hadn't cried for. And I think when we do allow ourselves to mourn courageously, we heal so many different layers that we've actually held on for so tightly. And this is what mourning courageously means. It just means get your Kleenex out, sit down and sob. It's okay. It's part of who we are and what's necessary for us to become more courageous about the future.
And John, then coming out of that process, you go into the second part, which you call abnormal. What prompted you to come from anguish and then decided, okay, I should now focus on abnormal?
Well, this is the stages of transformation. Transformation always has 3 stages. You know, it's the sadness of leaving the shore of familiarity. You then arrive into a strange new world, otherwise known as the wilderness, or otherwise known as abnormal, because you've arrived at somewhere that doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit into any of the constructs that you've been taught or are familiar with. And eventually you get into the adventure, but really where we are as humanity right now in the hero's journey is the sad and the strange, the anguish and the abnormal. And so we've got to become clear that this is where we are. So that if we wake up every morning hoping that everything is familiar again and it's not, we find ourselves in a tough place. You know, you become angry and upset about what's going on around you. But if you wake up every day and you realize that we are in the strange, in the abnormal, you then start to become more optimistic about researching the abnormal, becoming more familiar with the abnormal, because you realize that the abnormal today will be the normal in the adventure. And so really, for me, it's about how do we understand the future of food, the future of education, the future of technology, the future of humanness, the future of, and I'll try and go into future of everything that I could think of to try and give people an insight of, look, we're all in the same boat together. We're all going into the strange and abnormal world together. The people that are really enjoying the energy are the ones who've mourned courageously and have made a decision and created a discipline of exposing themselves to this new abnormal world and becoming more familiar with it. Because the truth is, you have no choice. Blockchain is not going anywhere. Cryptocurrency is not going anywhere. Artificial intelligence is not going anywhere. So you might as well engage with it, understand it, and capitalize on it, instead of being angry with it, being frustrated with it, and avoiding it at all costs.
Yeah, and I think you got my attention in that second part in terms of abnormality, especially with 2 concepts, which I want you, for the sake of our audience, just explain a little bit when you speak about right in the beginning of technology singularity, and then you use the word seculum, and that I found very interesting and profound in terms of as lenses to see where we are.
I'm so glad that you did. You know, when I was doing the research, that also relieved me of so much pressure that I had put on myself. And when I learned about the saculum, I was like, oh, this is what's going on. I couldn't figure out what was going on around us, you know. So very firstly, I mean, the singularity idea is an idea by Ray Kurzweil that tells us that intelligence will be as intelligent, if not more intelligent than human beings. anywhere between 2030 and 2040. I mean, that number keeps moving because of the radical sort of intelligence that artificial intelligence is making exponentially quicker than we actually even expected it to. So that's singularity on its own. And I don't want to panic people about it. I want us to understand that, you know, it's like electricity when it arrived, when we only had manpower. When we thought about steam engines and coal engines and all we had was cow power, horsepower, and manpower, it was incredibly scary to think that the whole agricultural world would be disrupted by the understanding of a new power source. And artificial intelligence is a new intelligence source. And again, it's incredibly scary. But again, we have to be able to engage with it. And look what we've done with electricity. You know, we've done amazing things, and we can't even imagine our lives without electricity today. And this will be the same with artificial intelligence and blockchain and all these things. So that's the singularity aspect of it. But if we think about the saculum, and I think that's also important because it ties in pretty well, is in 1996, there was a book that came out called The Fourth Turning. And in this book, William Strauss and Neil Howe, the two authors, explain that humanity is going through something called a saculum and has been going through the saculum for hundreds of years. And a saculum is approximately an 80-year cycle. Now, William Strauss and Neil Howe, you most probably don't know who they are, but in 1986, they brought out a book called Generations. And in it, they explain to us that every generation that's born has a different motivating factor. They are the ones who named baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, Gen Alpha. And they were the ones that gave us this language and this incredible structuring of society in a way, you know. So we've all used their language hundreds, if not thousands of times in our lives, but we didn't really know who the authors were. So we understand that they've come with really good research. They're very intelligent gentlemen. In fact, one of them's passed away, unfortunately. But in this book, The Fourth Turning, what they showed us is that in these 80-year cycles, you have 4 seasons. You have spring, summer, autumn, and winter, or as they call them, the first turning, the second turning, the third turning, and the fourth turning. And in the book in 1996, they explain that the last time a saculum ended, the last time an 80-year cycle ended was 1946. And that was the end of World War II. And what they said is the fourth turning, the last 20-year cycle, like moving towards the end of 1946 and World War II, what we had in the world was job losses, financial crisis, fascism, political divide, and war. Sound familiar? It's kind of exactly what we're going through now. And so what happens is what they show in the book is that, and they say in the book, we're not making any predictions. We're just going to tell you what happened in the last 80-year cycle. And if it is going to be repeating, which we think it is, from 2008 to 2028, we will again enter the fourth turning or the winter or the crisis. Yeah. And so this book was actually quite invisible in 1996. Nobody even paid any attention to it because, you know, in 1996, everything was hunky-dory, everything was fine. And then in 2008, this book became a bestseller, and then it went invisible again. And then in 2020, it became a bestseller again. And the reason for this is that people started to understand that we are very much in a saculum. And, you know, up until about 8 months ago, I thought COVID-19 was the war that they were speaking about because we did lose 6 million people. There was an invisible enemy that we were fighting. But then we had Putin rock up and hold on to the old ideas that he's wanting to bring into the future. And this is what Mussolini did, this is what Hitler did, and this is what Donald Trump is doing, and Xi Jinping, and all these old school leaders that have got this old idea of leadership and of power are trying to grab on to as much of that power as possible, but it's impossible because we have to end the cycle. And so the reason it's so important to understand this fourth turning or the saculum is that if you are having a crisis of meaning, in other words, if you think about everything that we once implicitly trusted, we can't trust anymore. And if you think about the education system, if you had a degree, you would be guaranteed a job. There's no guarantee now. You can have 3 degrees and not have a job. If you were in a marriage, it was almost guaranteed up until you died. That's not guaranteed anymore either. The patriarchy was something that we most probably didn't like that much, but we still believed in. And today we can see that the strong men out there are really just terrible people and just haven't been evolved that much. If we think about the financial system and America printing $2 trillion in the last 8 months, and you think to yourself, hang on a second, how did that even come about? And now all of a sudden it's here. And if you think about this, politics, leadership, money, power, all these things are up for question. which means that we are at the end of the cycle, which means that this is part of the cycle. Now, remember, and this will be the last piece here. Remember that in 1946 to 1964, humanity went through a renaissance, a spring, a brand new ideas of what the future could possibly be. And what we had in that period of time was the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund. We had jets being introduced to the world. We had TVs being introduced to the world. We had rockets being introduced. The space program was starting to evolve and get going. And all of a sudden, humanity was in this new phase of potential and sort of pushing towards this new, incredible, peaceful future. So as much as we don't like where we are, as much as it's uncomfortable to be in winter, it's part of the process in order for us to get to Renaissance. So when you wake up in the morning, don't expect spring, don't expect summer, don't expect familiarity. Expect implosion and become ready so that you can add value in a world that's in chaos, that eventually will reach an adventure. And in that adventure will be an opportunity for us to start to live lives way beyond our wildest dreams because of the technology and the sort of new energy that we'll be having as humanity.
Now, and I'm deviating here because this question may keep us busy for 2 hours. But now I'm just entertain this for a moment. So if we buy into this concept of seculum, this kind of cycle, how does one avoid determinism? In other words, that I say, well, I'm in a cycle, so I can't do anything about it. I just have to play out the cycle. I was just born at the time, and now I'm in that cycle. So how do I avoid that and understand that I am a co-creator? Because surely the cycle and the dynamics of the cycle are being co-created by people. It's not some invisible hand that is controlling the cycle.
Well, I think all of us, while we're alive, we experience one of these cycles. Whether you're 8 years old or 55, you're going to be experiencing the summer, the winter, the autumn. And so I don't know if it's so much about determinism. It's about taking advantage of the season that you're in.
Yeah.
If you're in winter, then know you're in winter. Do what you need to do in winter. As a good farmer would, a good farmer understands winter. He doesn't go, well, oh, it's just a season. I'm going to sit back. My apples didn't come again. It's a loss of anything. And I think determinism also has another word. It's called victimhood. And really what we have to do is we have to get out of that understanding and really start to take advantage of it. So the cycles and the seasons happen anyway, and as humanity we require them because otherwise life would be so boring and it would be so stable and there'd be no point of anything. So this up and down, this rebirth and death, this hero's journey that happens all the way from Hollywood all the way to God's seasons, we realize it's part and parcel of the process of us evolving.
Yeah. So John, so circling back to what you just said before I ask this deviating question. How do you see the future of leadership? Because you refer to it in the book as well. But what do you see kind of the future of leadership playing out there? Because the people in this audience, most of them are leaders, either of a department or a company or a division, etc. But how do you see leadership playing out?
Well, look, I think it's a very broad question, and I think leadership has like a million different iterations of it, and maybe let's touch on a few. I do think that major organizations will start to shift and change in how they operate because of technology. What we're seeing is the commoditization of so many different structures that the major organizations that used to bring efficiencies and economies of scale to a sector are going to become outdated because the future doesn't require economies of scale as much as it does economies of learning. And economies of learning is a very different structured business and requires agility at its heart. And what most organizations say is that they are agile, but they're really not, because you can't be agile and still give quarterly profits at a rising percentage. It goes against the idea of experimentation and agility. Agility means, or economies of learning means, is that we don't make any moves until the consumer tells us what they want and how they need it. Now, the example I use in the book is the difference between Zara and Shein. Now, Zara is a genius business that's built its business and success on economies of scale and efficiency. It is able to buy clothes, make clothes, and put them into their stores and hope that people will buy them. And it's a huge logistical miracle what they've created. But now you've got this brand called Shein in China that doesn't make one piece of clothing until you place an order. That's called economies of learning against economies of scale. And so as leaders, what we must realize is that you becoming better in an economies of scale business is not what the future requires. Now, the problem is that many of us have been trained and educated in economies of scale, not economies of learning. Economies of learning is a weird parallel type of thinking. And so what I always tell leaders inside organizations is stop trying to do both. That's the biggest problem we're having, is that organizations and leaders are asking their existing staff to think out the box. Now let's think about that for a second. Which disruption ever has come from within a sector? Zero. All disruptions come from outside of the sector. And so when you think about asking your existing staff that have been hired to bring stability to an existing system, how could they think about something outside of that system? And the biggest example I can give you is, why didn't Zara come up with Shein? Zara is very clever. Zara is incredibly clever. They changed the whole world of clothing, but they didn't come up with Shein. And so we must realize is that we almost as leaders need to divide our businesses. Our businesses must be very much focused on today, which is the economies of scale, which is the efficiency, which is what's keeping the lights going. And I don't want to take anything away from that. And I think it's important. But we need a tomorrow team. We need a leader that thinks about things 5 years ahead, that builds a business on a structure that's totally different. What frustrates me the most is organizations that ask their existing businesses and staff to think about what's tomorrow. Like I was dealing with one of the largest companies in the Middle East, and the CEO is a multi-billionaire, sells cars in the Middle East. And he said, I've been asking my current sales team in the car industry, in my sector, to think about selling cars in the future. And I said to him, sir, you're asking the wrong people. You should be hiring a team that's got nothing to do with cars, it's got everything to do with consumer understanding, that understands blockchain and AI and all these amazing new things, and allow them to play and experiment and imagine the possibilities so that you can run these two parallel teams so that one is building solutions for the future while one is keeping the old solution alive. Now, that's leadership in organizations. That's the way I see it. If we think about leadership elsewhere, we think about the era that we are moving into, and we have something new that's evolving around the world called the creator economy. And it's this creator economy that requires individual leadership. And that's why I said to you, it's so varied. The creator economy today is worth $16 billion. What is the creator economy? The creator economy, I believe, is the future of where we're going. It's individuals who have accessed their genius and have created products and services and selling them across the world, finding their tribes around the world and using technology in order to do so. Brands like Shopify, Spotify, YouTube, all these brands. And if you think about the kids today, you know, they all want to be YouTubers, but they don't really want to be YouTubers. They want to be creators. They want to be individual in the way they go about selling products and services to the tribe around the world that likes them. YouTube is only the platform that we know now that does it the best. But if they don't want to be YouTube influencers, they want to be creators. And leadership, when it comes to creation and becoming our own sort of passion project, is a totally different type of leadership. And so for me, leadership has got so many variations, but in organizations, let's focus on today and tomorrow separately. They're very, very different. You're moving from an industrial world to a quantum world. You're moving from the sort of fourth turning to the first turning. These are vastly different ideas and different concepts and different skills even, you know. In fact, some of the companies that I work with and build tomorrow teams for, which is something I've started doing because most organizations don't know how, is I've even introduced a new way for staff to work, and it's called slow motion multitasking. And I got this research from Albert Einstein. You know, Albert Einstein released 5 of his incredible research papers in 1 year. I think it was 1905, where he released 5 in one go. And one of them won a Nobel Prize. And people were like, wow, how do you come up with all of these? But what Albert Einstein did was something called slow motion multitasking, where he went from one project till he exhausted his thinking there and went to another project until he exhausted his thinking and then went to another project. And what he started doing was taking ideas and genius from this project and putting them into this project and then into this project. And in that process, what we create is multifaceted broad, open perspectives to deal with problems.
Yeah.
Whereas the Industrial Revolution requires us to be micro-focused like this. So there's a different way that we need to go about building those teams as well.
So I get a sense that you're not discarding economies of scale, but you're kind of, it's a both and, not an either or.
Yes, the world requires the lights to still be on. You know, economies of scale still building the world, but it's doing it in an industrial way. And think about what economies of scale is. It's a production line. The production line has just become a high rise. Same principles. We have to think about new principles, not to be better at economies of scale, but to understand what economies of learning looks like and how do we go about developing economies of learning businesses. And again, I keep saying this to all my clients, is why didn't Zara come up with Shein? Like, you know, why? What is that they didn't do that when they're so clever? So it's not about being clever. It's about applying a new question to be answered by a new team.
So when you spoke about that YouTuber, I was wondering if that was part of what you referred to, and you may want to say a bit more about that, this passion economy.
So the most successful YouTuber at the moment is a guy called Mr. Beast. And Mr. Beast is a 26-year-old mid-American town guy. This is a young guy. He has over 250 million followers on YouTube. And, you know, he did a Squid Game equivalent, and he got 300 million views on his Squid Game video, whereas Netflix got 160 million. Now we're talking Netflix, who spends billions of dollars with offices around the world, and this one cat with his one warehouse in Ohio was created that sort of buzz. So if we think about the passion economy, and if we think about the creator economy, this for me is the skill of the future. And let's think about this for a second. For the last 200 years, the Industrial Revolution has asked us to fit into a system. The system was about bringing economies of scale and profitability. The system required us to play roles. The roles were lawyer, doctor, accountant, you know, these roles. So you went to school to learn to fit into a system. And the more you could understand that system and change your brain to understand the system, the more successful you'd become. But as we move into the quantum world, we realize that the systems are falling apart. The actual systems that got us here are being commoditized away from us. Think about technology and how artificial intelligence and narrow intelligence is taking away so many narrow skills that we went to school to learn. And so we realize that the future has got nothing to do with fitting in. It's got everything to do with fitting out. Your currency of the future is your individualism. It's not your degree. And so if you think about the $16 billion industry called the creator economy, and you think about Mr. Beast at 25 years old, who's individually bigger than Netflix, individually, not even a little bit bigger, much bigger. It boggles your mind to think about the uniqueness that he's created about himself that we are all attracted to. As human beings, we are so sick and tired of same. And if you think about the banks, for example, FNB, you don't like them, go to Standard Bank, as rubbish. Go from Standard Bank, go to ABSA, as rubbish. They all irritate us. And then you get MTN and you get Cell C, and they're all the same. Everything's commoditized around us. You know, go from Nike to Puma to Adidas, all the same. So we are done with surplus. We are over the same. We want individualism. We want passion. And another great example of this is, have you ever watched Chef's Table on Netflix?
No.
And if you haven't, I highly recommend you do. It's about the top 50 chefs in the world. And it's a beautifully put together documentary. And what they show you is the exact same foods that you and I have access to in the same pantry. They are able to create an individual ability to bring about a meal that we pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars and wait 2 years to get into that restaurant to go and experience. What are they celebrating? Individualism. And so this becomes the currency of the future. And already we see a $16 billion industry that will soon be a 30, 50, 80, $100 billion business, all based on our individual passion and genius.
So I'm actually afraid to ask the next question. What are the implications for the future of education, which runs in very deep grooves?
Well, we do know that most people that are sending their kids to school today know that the kids are not going to be using the algebra and the history lessons. It's irrelevant. To be honest, it's totally irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything moving into the future. And I have never used algebra since I left school, not once, ever. So I think we all understand it's not working. I think it's quite unclear what it should be. And I think we're in that transition phase. And like I said a few minutes ago, we're in the fourth turning, moving to the first. We're at the end of the industrial, moving into the quantum. So we are in this transition phase with a lack of clarity. This is why abnormal, strangeness, wilderness. Look where we are. Everything's unfamiliar, so we don't know what actually to do. And so I get this question a lot. It's like, what should we be doing for our kids? What should we be doing with the educational system? And in fact, I'm working with Curo at the moment about the future of education and accessing a new sort of skill set for humanity. But really, if we get down to the nitty-gritty, I think kids need to understand language and a basic level of mathematics. Let's get that out the way. But I think if we think about the future, it's not about training people for jobs anymore. It's now training people to access what makes them come alive. Now, if you think about what Steve Jobs said, and if you think about even what Mr. Beast says in many of his interviews, it's if you don't find your purpose, your curiosity, your fascination, the future becomes a very terrible place. Why? Because it's so uncertain. And if you have accessed your genius and curiosity, uncertainty is wonderful because you're able to flow and shift and move because you're energized by the access of this incredible energy that you've accessed. So what we do for our kids, for me, besides getting the rudimentary English and maths out the way, is expose your kids to as many different businesses, jobs, startups, careers as possible. Because it's in that process of exposure that they get to understand what they really love and what they don't love. Now, Frick, I'm sure you'll agree with me. When we were kids, when we looked up at our parents and their friends, there was like 4 careers. You could be a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, or a failure. There was no other option. There was only those options to go into. And so the exposure we had was so minimal that we didn't know what actually made us come alive because we just never had this exposure. So for me, the kids of today need to be exposed and they need to be taught the tools of technology. Now, I had a discussion with friends of mine in Dubai. They've got a 15-year-old and a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old boy. And they were complaining to me that they spend far too much time on Instagram, right? Like all parents complain that their kids spend too much time on technology. But instead of taking the technology away, I spoke to my friends Stuart and Marina, and I said to them, can you not teach them or join a course together to understand how to make Instagram a business for you? How do you utilize YouTube to make a business rather than sitting there gaining information, also start adding information? And it was such a stunning sort of realization from Stuart and Marina. It was like, just because you don't spend that much time on there doesn't mean it's not the future. And it also means that if you don't have the skills to teach them, go and seek the skills, learn the skills together with them so they can prioritize understanding their passion and technology and evolve them to move into the future by adding real value to the world with technology.
So can we say that we should rather be teaching our children to read a compass instead of reading a map?
Okay, yeah, that's a nice, I like that. That's a good line. Where'd you get that line from? That's a flipping good line. I like it. Yeah, it's learning how to think, not what to think.
Yes.
And it's that agility in the brain that we haven't really had much practice with because you went to school, you got your degree, you went to work. Now you have to unlearn and you have to relearn. And that agility in our brain is very, very difficult. It's like it's a huge process for us to unlearn, especially men. Our brains are so solidly stuck in those neurons that have wired and fired together for decades. So yes, you're right. It's a compass over a map. I love that. I'm going to be using that. So thank you.
So, but I also would think there worldwide, it would be the big challenge there would be the regulatory environment, the Department of Higher Education and Training, or whatever they call themselves, because you have to operate within the lines there. If something don't shift there, they will make it very difficult. Although if you look at the workforce, and that's what I want to come back to you now, because I think part of what our audience is confronted with is this kind of concept of future workplace. Now, before COVID, that was kind of an interesting concept and a seminar on it here and there, and a webinar, not necessarily a webinar, but a seminar on it. And then suddenly COVID, and suddenly the future of work and working from home is a reality. Your view?
Again, such a broad topic. There's no one answer. You know, I loved what Satya Nadella said, Microsoft CEO. He said, every team gets to choose the individual needs of their teams. It was as simple as that. If our team needs to come in twice a week to work on collaborative ideas together, that's what we need to do. If you need to leave at 3 o'clock to pick up your kids and watch them do ballet, that's what you need to do. You need to pick up work later, that's what you need to do. So I think while we're in this transition phase between understanding work is not a place you go to, but something you do, that's a transition phase. We're still not quite clear of what works best, what doesn't work best. And I think a lot of people actually resigned. I mean, we had the great resignation happening around the world where people were like, you know what, I don't need to put up with that crap anymore. I can go and actually build something of my own. And because I haven't been exposing myself to the opportunities of being a global entrepreneur on the internet, I haven't been thinking big enough. I haven't been thinking widely enough and understanding that kids out there from this most small and obscure little towns are making millions doing what they absolutely love is now an opportunity for all of us to click into that. So if we think about the future of work, we have to allow individualism. And even with my teams, and I don't have a very big team around me, but even with my teams, I'm like, look, from 9 to 2, let's all be focused. After that, let's have a little more ease and understand to do creative things differently or think about things differently. On Fridays, let's switch off at 12. I want to go and enjoy my life as well. I don't want to be working all the time. So I've created rules in conjunction with what my team wanted, and we created them together. And I think it's important for us to do that. But I also know that sitting in your pajamas at home is not a good thing for your productivity, you know, and many times I actually mock a lot of the companies that I have briefing sessions with. And, you know, often it's the ladies on the other side of the camera that say, no, my camera is not working today. I'm like, no, you're still in your pajamas. That's what's going on here. You didn't actually get up and get dressed. So I think we also, as employees, as employers, we're understanding it's a transition phase. We need to make this work for both parties, and we need to give people the freedom and realize that, you know, we're not robots. We are gardens. Sometimes we want more sun. Sometimes we want less water. But we are not robots, and we're done with being robots and fitting into a system.
I want to use a line in your book to go to part 3, the last part of your book, which is called Adventure. You say, as we move through anguish and familiarize ourselves with the abnormal, to embrace adventure, we have to undergo a process of positive disintegration.
So this term positive disintegration is something that, you know, I started to learn while I was doing it. And what positive disintegration means is that I understand that I need to disintegrate my old identity to develop a new one. This is a mature, aware hero on his journey. A immature, unaware hero complains about the pain of evolving. And what positive disintegration also really got me thinking is I did the Ironman last year, and I had to reshift and recalibrate my relationship with pain, because that's what the Ironman is. It's a reshifting of your relationship with pain. So I had to positively disintegrate who I was in order to be able to become who I need to become. And in order for us to move from sad and strange into an adventure, you needed to have mourned courageously, become optimistic about strangeness, to start to develop the skills for what's needed next. And so positively disintegrating is a mature, elegant way of going through change.
And so when you enter into this adventure, it would seem from what you described there, words that we know from the past, but you write them in capital letters, the beginning part of the words. You have to develop hindsight, plain sight, insight, foresight.
Yeah. So look, if I can just talk broadly about adventure, and then I'll come back to the sites that I described. The adventure ahead requires us to access a different form of energy from who we are as humans. And this becomes it's a weird thing for us to get our heads around, but stay with me while I explain it. 500 years ago, we were all agricultural beasts. the most important skill that we had as human beings was our muscles, because it was our muscles and our brawn that was able to allow us to work the fields for 16 hours a day to feed ourselves and our families. When the Industrial Revolution arrived 200 years ago, our source of power changed. Our cow power, manpower, and horsepower became steam power. All of a sudden, factories replaced our bodies. No matter how strong you were, the factory was stronger than you by a long shot. It wasn't even in the same category. And so we had to develop a new skill. The new skill for the last 200 years is what we've been going to education to learn, has been IQ, knowledge and intelligence, left brain process-driven thinking with absolute outcomes at the end called economies of scale and profitability. This has been 200 years of absolute success. We've created incredible things around us in the world utilizing this process of IQ, intelligence, and knowledge. But as we move into this next phase, this new adventure requires us to again change which parts of our bodies we use to be able to access a new level of intelligence. We realize that just like our bodies replaced our factories replaced our bodies, IQ is being replaced by AI. Knowledge is being replaced by technology. There is no way we can compete when it comes to AI in its narrow intelligence. It's faster, sharper, quicker, and forever on than we can ever be. So the new skill set for the adventure ahead is intuition. It's from our hearts. And this shifts from muscles to brain to heart. And this new sort of consciousness or this new beingness of humanness that we are becoming and are forced to become because of technology and because of AI is what we need to start developing within ourselves and our children, because this will become the currency of the future. So you have an opportunity to see the world through hindsight, plain sight, insight, or foresight. What's hindsight? Is when you always look to the back and hope the future was more like the back. It's called Make America Great Again. It's like you're trying to bring the past into the future. It's impossible. You're never going to do that. Just like what Hitler tried to do. The second part is plain sight. People that believe in Newtonian science and not quantum science. There's a vast difference. Newtonian science says reality is objective. Quantum science says reality is subjective. Quantum science gets us full responsibility for creating this world ahead of us. Newtonian science said you have no power on the reality ahead of you. You must just go through the process of doing what you're doing. Insight is people with high levels of knowledge, all the degrees, all the doctorates, all the MBAs, all those amazing things that were incredibly needed for a world of industrial revolution are people with high levels of insight. What foresight is actually becoming agile and adaptable for what the future requires of you, not being required of what you learned in the past. Because we realize that whatever you learned in the past is most probably going to be overrun by AI. Because everything from dentists, I've seen an AI dentist, to artists, to writers, to drivers, to you just name it, all of it, AI is starting to do better than us. So we have to become agile. We have to have foresight. And so what's foresight made of? Or intuition, or the skill of the future. And it's made up of 5 things. And we can go into each one of them, and I can break them down for you the way I understand them. The first one is called wisdom. And wisdom is healing our past, because no matter how much knowledge you have in your head, if you're carrying trauma in your heart, you're just creating a very ugly world ahead of you. So you can have all the degrees and the Mercedes-Benz, but you're having an affair and you're addicted to drugs. What's the point? Because you haven't healed the trauma. So wisdom is having memories with no triggers. That's intuitiveness. To be able to bring intuition into the world, we have to heal who we were in order to become a truer version of ourselves. 2, it's making decisions based on curiosity and fascination. We have never been gifted or celebrated for doing that. At school, if you were too curious or too fascinated with the world outside of school, you'd have something thrown at your head and say, hey, Yanni, come back into the class and learn algebra, right? So we weren't allowed to be curious.
Concentrate.
Concentrate, exactly. Don't be curious, concentrate. 3, imagination. We have not used our imagination correctly. We have, in fact, used imagination in the worst way possible. In fact, we are so bad at using imagination that UNESCO's Future Literacy Program calls the mega trend that humanity is under a poverty in reimagination. Humanity is so keen to hold on to the old world, we are not even imagining possible and plausible futures and working towards them. And the worst way to use imagination is called anxiousness. Because what anxiousness says is that the worst possible catastrophe is happening all around us, ahead of us, and we must prepare for it. That's imagination in the most terrible way that we are all using, unfortunately. 4, experimentation, because experimentation brings your curiosity, from your imagination into your hands. It almost makes it from thinking, doing to feeling. You almost like you become more tactile with experimenting with things. And then 5, and the most important one, and I think this is something we need to talk about, meditation. And the reason I say meditation is that we often learn or hear that we need to unlearn to relearn. And Alvin Toffler, the famous author, said the illiterate of the 21st century won't be the ones who can't read or write. It will be the ones who can't unlearn and relearn. And so if we understand what does unlearning actually mean, and that's the tough thing, is that it's a buzzword, like is agility and innovation. And it's just a buzzword people throw around, but do nothing different, right? So unlearning comes from a process of understanding the neurons that have been wired and fired together throughout your life, for your whole life, that you've been thinking about things in the same way. And what unlearning means is that you stop thinking about things in a certain way and you start thinking about things in a new way. That's what unlearning is. But if you're not able to take yourself into a meditative state where you loosen those neurons over and over and over in order to be able to learn new neurons and new wiring of the brain, you aren't ever able to unlearn. So I can go deeper into the meditation process to understand the brain waves that are required to do real unlearning for what the future requires, but I'll leave that up to you. So that's quite a mouthful that I've shared already.
It seems to me, if I look at the section of adventure and what you've shared with us now, you use one word there that I think resonates with most of this, and that's the word grit.
So, the thing with grit is that we've often thought about resilience and grit is by pushing through, like really being strong and just keep pushing through, which I think is the worst thing we could do.
Yeah.
What we have to start doing is not pushing through the old world, but reimagining the world ahead. So resilience and reimagination, grit and recalibration. And that's the hardest thing. It's almost easy to force the world like you want it to be, to reassess the world, to show up with a new skill set with grit is incredibly tough. Now, if we think about it, if we went back to agricultural times and we told everybody in agricultural times, look, everything you've learned for the last 500 years from your forefathers about the seasons and the soils is irrelevant. You need to now start learning mathematics, accounting, and you need to come and work in the factories. The farmers would think of you speaking Chinese. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? This is what I've learned for hundreds of years. I can't work in a factory. And so we realize that now as we move into this new world, it requires true reimagination resilience, true recalibration of grit to be able to think about how we need to evolve into this new future. Hence the book, Who Do We Become? How do we evolve ourselves to meet this future?
Okay, so I think, and I've ran out of questions. So I think then what we've started off with, and that's the title of the book, has significantly been answered by you, and it's up to the audience to answer that for ourselves, because I think there is a very strong case not to avoid this question, but to really deal with it and make sense of it in how we want to do and experience that positive, what you call disintegration. Yeah. John,
Look,
I really thank you for this. I really appreciate this. You don't want to give us a glimpse of the future in terms of your experience in Mexico that we spoke about?
Sure.
We've got a minute or two left.
Sure. The future is different for everybody. I call myself a futures strategist, which is a plural on the end of future, meaning that we all create our own futures. Don't you know somebody that makes money no matter what's going on in the economy? And don't you know somebody that never makes money no matter what's going on in the economy? What does that mean? It means that we have our own individual power to create the futures we want. Some people are stuck with potholes and rubbish not being picked up because they're angry with the government and they want ways to prove that they're still angry with the government. And other people live in places in South Africa that have municipalities that look after everything because they never had an issue with the story of the government. So I wasn't looking for those situations. And that responsibility for the future becomes an incredibly important thing that we do, exposing ourselves to the future just 10 minutes a day, meditating to learn to unlearn in order to be able to learn something new, to becoming more emotionally aware about where we're going and taking the responsibility to do that work becomes your currency of the future, becomes who you are going to become in that future. So it really, at the end of the day, the future isn't one place. It's 7.5 billion places. In fact, it's 8 billion places. And it's 8 billion places that people create their own pockets of future realities. You know, I lived in Cape Town a few years ago in an apartment block in Sea Point, and I lived on the 6th floor, and there was a gentleman who lived above me on the 7th floor. And he would always tell me that Sea Point was a cesspit of drug dealers and gangs. I was living on the 6th floor. I never saw one gang, not one drug, I saw none of that. He saw all of that. And we were one floor away from each other. I was traveling the world, earning dollars, living in rands, living the dreams of my life. And he was the one fighting with the cops and the drug dealers. He was one floor away from me. So the future requires you to take the responsibility of how you show up, what you heal from your past, and how you're exposed to the future. And really become optimistic about it, because you have no choice. The future's coming whether you like it or not.
John, thank you so much. And thank you for not just for the time to come and share this with us, but for being willing to sit down and do the hard writing and the thinking to share these ideas and experiences with us. We really appreciate that, and we really thank you for doing this.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I did. I'm looking forward to also our next book club. And then we will have the author, Daniel Pink, with us. But we will share more of that information with you. Also, remember, we have also on a Thursday our Directors Hour, and we will shortly share with you more information about that. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you for being part of this. And remember, you can get a link from Wayne to go and have a re-look at what we have discussed today. Thank you. Keep well.